Welcome back, everybody. We are here with Timothy Massad, the former chair of the CFTC and a research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. I want to say a sincere thanks for sitting down with us here at Bitcoin Magazine. Very much, we appreciate it. But I just watched your talk, and it was incredible. And I think in a very nuanced way, you addressed a very important topic in this space to a lot of Bitcoin proponents, and that's privacy.
Yeah.
So on some level, people want, none of their transactions to be seen, though it's a public blockchain, that you can use Bitcoin mixers and things like this. And for the sake of activists, we know that this is kind of a necessity. And at the same time, politicians sort of have to know what's happening on some level to make sure that there aren't terrorists sort of thing, being used for illicit purposes, all of this kind of stuff. And I think you very astutely said, I don't have the answer to this yet. And I appreciate that. I appreciate the intellectual honesty there. When you think about this issue of transacting with Bitcoin or another crypto asset, what are some of the things that you consider when you think about privacy?
Sure. Well, I think it's just a matter of we've got to figure out a new way of balancing competing concerns. There's a very legitimate interest in privacy. I don't want everybody to know my transactions either. And so how do you achieve that at the same time as how do you achieve the legitimate needs of governments to know who's transacting it sometimes and to prevent illicit activity? And so I think you have to step back and say, look, we're moving from a system that depended on centralized intermediaries and was entirely account-based. Mm-hmm. And governments basically outsourced the need for determining who was transacting and preventing money laundering and preventing the financing of terrorism to banks. And particularly with the United States, we were able to build a system where we can rely on banks all over the world to do that. And that comes from a lot of different things, which I talked about in one paper in terms of the growth of the Eurodollar market and other things. But now, when you look at digital technology and blockchain technology, you're talking about the ability to move things as essentially as bearer instruments, mm-hmm. not account-based. So, I think it's a matter of developing some new kind of technologies within that to achieve that. I don't know exactly what they are, but I do think of this as the central challenge for digital technology, because I think it has a very bright future if we can solve this. And to me, it's probably some combination of what I call digital identity. In other words, people have a credential that they can use online without revealing exactly who they are, what their birth date is. Yeah. I get so frustrated when I go, I have to give my birth date and social security number to someone who's just providing some simple little service.
Correct.
So they would be able to provide that, and a smart contract wouldn't process a transaction unless you could provide that. And maybe there's, zero knowledge proofs that are part of that. Whereas at the same time, protecting that privacy. I don't know what the answer is, but I think it's the central challenge for this technology.
And that was actually that point you made. You made in the first subcommittee hearing on digital assets. You talked about that idea of a smart tract being designed in a certain way where it could prohibit that. But some of this technology is created offshore.
Sure.
When you think about that, obviously this is sort of a global thing.
It's a global thing for sure, and we're going to have global standards. And look, I had the job of trying to create harmony of global standards with respect to over-the-counter swaps. It's not easy to create global standards, but it can be done. Right. And we're at an early stage here. We don't even have national frameworks yet in place, so it's going to take us some time to get there. But again, I encourage anyone who understands the technology and can help develop possible solutions. To me, this is the holy grail of the whole industry.
Amazing, interesting. I work with a lot of activists, and they often sort of say to me, whatever sort of regulation and policy comes out of the United States is going to be sort of copied and pasted on some level globally. Yeah. And I speak with a lot of people in Latin America and Africa who tell me the same. Do you think about this? I'm thinking as a regulator, do you think, oh, you do? Interesting. Could you expand? I'm sure you do.
I think about the fact that it's going to be copied?
Yes.
Oh, sure, I do. And we're a little behind some jurisdictions, obviously, in doing stuff, particularly on, just general stablecoin regulation, market structure regulation. The Congress is now getting there. But, and I hope we set a good standard, a high standard, a sensible standard.
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, and I know you said it there. You talked about in the room just a minute ago. You talked about, yes, there are some people who need to use Bitcoin if they're living under an oppressive regime or something like that. But it's also, I think, it's the exception, not the rule, to live in a liberal democracy. So again, more generally speaking, do you think that American policymakers think about this? That what we do here will have an effect on certain people who sort of need Bitcoin as maybe a Trojan horse or something like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that they actively do. On the other hand, I don't know that they're going to do anything. I mean, I think they're struggling with all these issues.
There's a lot going on, yeah.
And I think, if you look at just what's happening in terms of the stablecoin legislation, it's really focused on things that the stablecoin issuers have to do, which doesn't go to the full picture, right? And I keep saying, that's not the full picture. You've got to do more than that. But you're right. We've got to be thinking about how do you develop standards that don't unnecessarily, that don't compromise the safety or the security of people in those repressive regimes.
Yeah, absolutely. As a final thought, you talked about the strategic Bitcoin reserve, and you said, yes, people are excited, their bags are going to get pumped, all this kind of stuff. But on the other side, I had a conversation recently with a congressman, won't mention a name here, but, he said also, in a sense, and part of my language, but God forbid something does go wrong with the fiat system, the government having some Bitcoin would be a good thing. Do you think that's hyperbole?
I think that's hyperbole.
Okay.
And I think actually even thinking that way kind of does more damage than good.
Okay, fair enough.
I mean, look, the dollar is still fundamentally strong. I'm a little worried about the events recently in terms of tariff, but the dollar is fundamentally strong. And frankly, we should be looking at ways to strengthen it, not to replace it.
Okay. Understood. Well, Mr. Massad, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
All right.
Yes. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.